Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here today to talk to you about creating campaigns. Promotional campaigns can be such a terrific tool for you to get word out about a special sale or a product launch, but it's really important to do them the right way. So let's dive in. First of all, let's talk about some terminology, right? Because sometimes we all use different words to mean different things. But I want to really separate a drumbeat communications. This is the kind of stuff you're doing all the time in your business in terms of promotional activity versus a campaign. Because today we're only talking about campaigns, not a broader strategy. So let's start off with timing. A drumbeat kind of communications. This is just the ongoing stuff. It's part of daily business. If you post photos of your product every 3 days on Insta, that's just your drumbeat. That's the ongoing communications that happens. The messaging is usually pretty generalized. It's often brand building, right? You're talking about a specific product feature or product benefit. Maybe you're giving a shout out to a customer, but really this is kind of generalized. You don't have necessarily a specific call to action other than be interested in us. The branding is pretty consistent throughout. You want everything to look very similar. The language tends to be the same. The tone tends to be the same. So again, it's that kind of consistent cadence and approach that just keeps that repetition going so people will start connecting with you. And usually the metrics you use for measuring the success of your ongoing communications is about things like increasing engagement or getting people to flow to your website to sign up for a newsletter. So they're very generalized. They're a little bit bigger picture. It's all about getting customers into your sales funnel, right? You're trying to get them to be interested in buying from you. Whereas a campaign's a little different. So campaigns have a specific start and stop. They don't go on forever. They don't last for 2 or 3 months. They're usually pretty short. Often they can be 1 week, 2 weeks. I wouldn't go a whole lot longer than that because people lose interest. Because the idea is you want to hit them with some great news and information before you go ahead and go on back to your drumbeat communications. In terms of messaging, there is a very defined call to action. It's not unclear, it's not vague. You're not trying to kind of just get people to be interested in you. You want them to specifically do something. It's a very specific task that you can measure. And that's very important. And you want them to do it, as I said, in that very specific timeline. The branding needs to be aligned to what you do all the time, but it may not be identical. You may use brighter colors or different images. The key of it is people are used to seeing you in a certain way. Now you want to amp it up. You want to really put a spotlight on something for a couple weeks and then continue your normal work. And then your success metrics, this is really important. The only success metric that matters is whether or not people responded to your call to action. So if your call to action was to generate sales, your success metric is revenue. If you wanted to go ahead and get people to sign up for a membership, your success metric is how many new members you signed up. So it's very results oriented. It's not necessarily about people connecting and being interested. It's about, did people make the commitment you asked them to do in your call to action? So we're going to talk about how the campaign goes forward. And you're going to notice a lot of this stuff is pretty similar to what you do for your overall drumbeat strategy, but it just has a little bit of a different spin on it. So here's what you get out of having a really successful campaign. You're probably thinking, well, this sounds like a lot of extra work. Do we really need these? Yeah, you do. And here's why. So first of all, it's a chance to convert new customers. A lot of people will engage with you on social media, or maybe they're reading your emails, maybe they're seeing your ads. They may connect with you. This is your chance to say, hey, I know you've been thinking about buying from us, now do it. We're going to help you. We're going to give you a reason to do it, but we really need you to go ahead and make that purchase. So a lot of times this is a really good catalyst and a motivator for changing those prospect customers to actual customers. It does help you expand brand awareness because the reality is people tend to respond to something with timelines. They pay a little bit more attention. You're forcing them to pay attention in a specific timeline. That sometimes can really help expand your brand awareness. This is a really great opportunity for improving how audiences understand you too. You know, they might have been thinking about buying from you for a while, but been a little bit on the fence because they didn't understand everything. Because your campaign is focusing so specifically on benefits and what they're going to get out of whatever action you're asking them to take, It just helps clear it up. Sometimes the fog clears up a little bit and the clarity really can help people understand why they should go ahead and buy from you. And finally, the really great thing about a campaign is that it lets you prioritize resources. Because let's face facts, not only are we expecting a lot of our customers to expect them to pay attention to us at the same level every day, but we're asking a lot of ourselves when we're trying to go ahead and have constant, sales, constant activity. This gives us a chance to look and say, hey, we want to gear up for something. Let's put a little bit more time and energy into it, and we can plan for it and prioritize it. So that means you can plan time, you can plan access, you can plan when you want to get new tools. Anytime you can prioritize your resources as an entrepreneur is something that's going to help you run your business. So let's talk about the first myth. I'm a real fan of breaking through some of these myths that we see. The first one is successful promotional campaigns just happen. Nope, that's just not the case. Now, there are some really fun exceptions to this, right? You'll hear about one ad comes out that was generated in 48 hours. Yeah, it can happen, but first of all, there's a ton of money that has to happen to make that go forward. And second of all, yeah, it just means probably people just had to plan a whole lot faster. Behind the scenes, I can guarantee those things are a mess. But the reality is successful campaigns don't just happen. They need planning, they need attention. They have to fit into a lot of different pieces and usually touch a lot of different people in your organization, whether it's you, external vendors, your own social media platforms, whatever it is, it's almost never entirely within your control. And so they don't just happen. So we're going to talk about what to do in response. What this means is that there are certain steps to doing a campaign that you want to follow every time. Now, whether these stretch out over a week or over 24 hours, that's based on your timeline. But these are the critical steps you always want to follow. We're going to walk through each one in some detail. But you want to define your objectives, you want to make the plan, you want to execute the plan, and you want to review the metrics. One of my former bosses said this really well. His metaphor for this was to think about playing pool. He said, you want to go ahead, you want to call the pocket that you're going to hit the ball into, then you want to hit the ball into the pocket, and then you want to tell everybody you hit the ball into the pocket, and then you want to see if you're going to hit the ball differently next time. So you really want to make sure you're following all 4 of these steps. Again, they can be speeded up, they can be slowed down, but the 4 have to happen. So number 1, let's talk about defining objectives. So setting good objectives is absolutely critical to your campaign. Just saying we want to put something on sale or have a special holiday promotion isn't enough. Not because of the fact that you can't execute to that, but because you just don't know if you're succeeding very well. So let's think about what it needs to include. It needs to be very specific. What is it exactly that you're trying to achieve? What is that call to action that you're going to measure? What is the timeline? Is it a 1-week campaign, a 2-week campaign? Is it going to happen in the first week of the month, last week of the month? All that stuff matters. Is it measurable? So the key of it is you have to have a call to action that then leads to a result that you can measure. So this is why when I hear entrepreneurs saying they want to run a campaign to bolster awareness or to work on thought leadership, those are incredibly vague and very hard to measure. So may not be the right topics for an actual campaign. It has to be relevant. Here's the thing. If you're trying to grow revenue and you're setting goals for a campaign that are talking about building awareness, you might be missing an opportunity. Whatever you're doing in your campaigns has to be relevant to what you're trying to achieve in your business. So don't lose sight of that. If revenue is your target, the call to actions should all be related to revenue. That's really critical. And finally, they need to be achievable. Look, we would all love to be an entrepreneur who runs a campaign and millions of people would just go ahead and buy it. But being able to succeed in your campaign, you want your goals to be achievable. You don't want to have something that's so unrealistic it's impossible to go for. Don't get me wrong. I hope you're pleasantly surprised by the great things that come from your campaigns, but you really need to have achievable goals for your organization. If generating 20 sales or getting 3 new people to join your organization is a good goal for you, looking at your history of sales and how things are going, that's great. These are relevant to you, not necessarily to the public. So here's some examples of what you might want to do. You can do sales related and audience related. Now, in general, campaigns tend to skew sales related, right? Because that's usually what you're trying to do. You're trying to drive up momentum. You can also use some audience related ones, but they're a little hazier. But if you're determined to do thought leadership and brand awareness, I want to include a couple of those for you. So sales related. It could be that your objective is to launch a new product or service. How would you measure that? You might measure it by how many people you can get to click on your new web page about your new product or service. That's a really easy thing to say. They see you on social, they looked at the new stuff. Cool. It might be to drive sales, and let's face facts, that's a flat out revenue thing, right? You're having a sale for back to school, there's a special promo code. How many people use that promo code to purchase from you? Ta-da. And then finally, generating leads. Now, this is very specifically in the sales section, not the audience section. And the reason being is that leads are the way you generate sales, right? You want to get people into your sales funnel so then they will go ahead and continue forward toward purchasing your product. It might be that you need to generate a campaign so that people actually look at what you're doing and become leads. You might want to get people who will sign up for newsletters or give you their email address or tell you they're interested or sign up for a call, something like this. But it may be that what you're really looking to do in a sales context is make sure that you start identifying and quantifying the people who might be buying from you. Now, let's look at the audience related ones. Again, these aren't going to be typical, but as you're doing your overall marketing strategy, you may find occasionally you need to do a little bit of a binge to get some more attention. Because the reality is no great campaign can succeed unless you already have people who are interested, right? So this may be where you have to start. So if you're doing audience related campaigns, you might decide to pick a week in a month when you say, we just want to add followers and connections. That's our goal. So we're going to have a lot of open-ended questions, or we're going to deliberately have some content that is thought-provoking, because our goal is to pump up our numbers so that later on when we try to have a sales campaign, we've got more people paying attention to it. You just need more eyes. It also is a good opportunity sometimes to recognize existing customers. You may say, hey, you know what? We're trying to make sure that our customers know about us. So for this week, we're going to put a bunch of information out there recognizing our current customers. Now, again, key is you've got to figure out how are you going to measure the success. It can't be that you did it. It's got to be what did the call to action get out of it. Another really great one that's audience related, it can be sales related depending on what your offering is promoting an activity or an event. So let's say that you're having a special webinar or you're going to be having a grand opening launch. Those are great things for campaigns because they have a very finite time period. You definitely want a response, and you can probably track the response in whatever system you're using for registration for your event or your activity. So that kind of goes in between sales and audience, depending on if it's a chargeable, if it's an event you charge people for, or if it's an event that is in part of your offering, or if it's just an event that is bolstering your exposure. All right, and you're going to have way more of these, but in general, the key is remember all those characteristics we have on the first page. It's got to meet all those. Every objective has to. Here's some tips about it, setting objectives for your campaign. So first of all, pick one priority objectives. The reality is people's brains are not going to remember that you had 6 different objectives in there. If your objective is to get people to buy something, everything that you say in that campaign needs to be about buying something. Don't muddle it up with, oh yeah, by the way, sign up for our newsletter. And oh yeah, by the way, we're going to be at a farmer's market next week. You can't put a million things into one message. Plan a reasonable timeline. So this is what happens sometimes is people will say, oh, let's launch a campaign. It's Friday afternoon. Let's start it on Monday. Well, the problem is you didn't give yourself enough time to do good planning, and that's going to backfire on you. So be sure when you're planning your timeline, you're planning the prep time, and you're also planning time at the end to do the review and do some lessons learned work, because a campaign needs to include those 2 steps so that you can build on your successes over time. As I mentioned before, whether or not people already know about you and are engaged with you will significantly impact your results of your campaign. So if people haven't heard from you or don't know about your existence, it's going to be really hard to take them from not knowing about you all the way to being willing to buy from you in one big step. That's really hard to do. And think about yourself. Even if you're scrolling around, you're going through Instagram and you see some ad for something that's kind of interesting, you may click on the shop now piece, but how often are you really actually buying it that first time? You might be looking at it, you might be checking it out, you may be saying, oh, I'll watch for a sale later, or I'm going to send this to my friends, see what they think, but people aren't going straight from, I just heard of you, to let me buy from you very quickly, even in the online space. So if you've already got a bunch of people who are interested in you and are just needing that little push forward to make the buy, that's where the power is. And start with smaller campaigns, especially if you don't have that audience yet. Don't hinge everything on one big sale that's going to happen one time in the year if you know that you don't necessarily have enough eyes on you already. Go ahead and give yourself a break. Smaller campaigns over a longer period of time can be good, and they can grow over time. If you only have one product now and you want to have a sale on it for a week, great. But you can always have a sale on 2 products and for 3 weeks later on. Whatever works for you. Just recognize it's okay to start small, because you're going to be getting those lessons learned and those metrics that are going to help you tweak things as you go forward. So this is a constant learning process. So here's what to avoid. Don't have multiple competing objectives in a campaign. And I see this happen a lot, where somebody will say, well, wait, if we're having a sale, people will read my email, my e-blast about it. So I want to talk about 5 other things because I've got their attention. Yeah, the problem is you probably lost their attention. They might have unsubscribed, and it's too much. They're not going to remember. We're lucky if people remember one thing from what they saw in a campaign on social or in any other channel. So don't have competing objectives. Don't get in your own way. Don't rush the campaign, as we talked about, making sure you have time for strong planning and good measurement at the end. Don't confuse overall marketing objectives with your campaign objectives. This is easy to have happen. So sometimes what will happen is somebody will say, I want to run a campaign, and the campaign is going to be about, let's have a special back to sale promo. Well, that's great. But then somebody starts saying, you know, it'd be great is if we also got everybody to sign up for our newsletter. And you know, it'd be really great is if everybody followed us. And wouldn't it be great, great, great? And you can see you're already starting to have a bunch of general marketing objectives that are competing with your actual call to action for your campaign. Don't get stuff muddled. Make sure you're really focused, and make sure you're not getting caught up in thought leadership or brand awareness goals, which tend to be broader general marketing objectives, instead of focusing on what you're trying to accomplish in this one specific campaign. And finally, as we said, don't try to do everything at one time. If you're doing a campaign for 2 weeks, during the 2 weeks, that campaign is your focus of all your channels. Let everything else go by the wayside, and then bring it back in later on. But remember, your audience is likely to get confused at best. At worst, if they hear too much stuff from you that just seems to be overwhelming, they'll just disconnect. All right, so your first at-home exercise is grab a piece of paper and a pen and think about a campaign you'd like to do in early 2022. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be big or small, but think about something that you want to run as a campaign in that very specific, defined timeline kind of space. And answer these questions. What is the primary objective for your campaign? And is it, remember, these are the 5 characteristics of a good objective. Is it specific? Is it time-bound? Is it measurable? Is it relevant? And is it achievable? If you answer no to any of those questions, keep working on it. You'll get there. All right, now it's time for us to dive into the next fun part, making the plan. So here's the other myth. Planning is optional. The number of times I have heard an entrepreneur who says, you know, I'm just not a detail person. Or, well, you know, I kind of like to go with the flow. I kind of make spur of the moment decisions. Here's the thing. There's not a whole lot of evidence out there to support that going with the flow and doing it last minute is a predictable success model. It just isn't. Planning isn't optional. Now, if you're not a detailed person, planning is more important than ever, because it'll force you to answer and ask and answer questions that otherwise you might forget. So planning is not an optional thing. And if you say you're not a detailed person, like I said, it's even more important for you to take the time. Now, don't get yourself wrapped around the perfect plan, but this time is important, and we're going to walk through some steps for this. So there are 4 basic elements of a campaign plan. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to walk through each one of these, but they're audiences, channels, timing, and content. This is like chemistry. If you mix these 4 elements in a mixture together and you get the right mixture, amazing things come out of it. Unfortunately, of course, if you miss the mixture, it can also blow up on you. That's why the planning steps matter. All right, let's dive in. Understanding your audience, because the reality is You can't ask everybody to take an action if they don't think you know who they are. So be sure you understand these things about your audience for the campaign. Now, remember, the audience for your campaign may not be the same as your audiences for everything else you do in marketing. So let's say that you sell a wide range of products for adults and kids, but you're having a back to school promo. During that promotion, you may only be talking about selling at a discounted rate the stuff that's for kids. That's wonderful. Nothing wrong with that at all. But remember, your audience is only going to be the people who buy for kids, right? Because you're not promoting the adult stuff, you're promoting the kids stuff. So that's important. All right, so let's walk through this. First, you've got to know who they are. This has to do with demographics. So this is things like gender, like income level, that kind of stuff, educational level, and geographies. Because if you are having a big event, if you're promoting a big event in your campaign and you're in Chicago and you're promoting it to people in LA, well, that may not work out quite as well as you think. So be sure you take a little bit of time to write that down. Make sure you understand where your audience goes for purchase information. Where do they go for information they use when they're thinking about buying something? By the way, just a little hint, where they go for information about buying stuff may not be the same as where they go when they want to show pictures of last night's party or their family pictures or whatever. Those may not be the same thing. So be sure you're really focusing not on what social media they use in general, but where do they go for information when they need to buy something. Make sure you understand what problem they're trying to solve by buying your stuff. Because if they don't think they need to solve a problem, they don't need to buy from you. So be sure you figure that out. Another really important one is, how did they talk about this challenge? Make sure that you understand what words and terms they use. So for example, the way a mom might talk about something is different than somebody who doesn't have any kids. They might use different terminology. Just be sure that you're connecting with the words that they use and that you know what those are. Think about who you're competing with for their attention. Your audience gets a lot of messaging from a lot of different places. So just be a little bit of aware of who else are they hearing from during this campaign so that you can be aware of how you might need to tailor your message or your timing to make it work out. Going back to our back to school example, parents are besieged with information about stuff around back to school time. So you're competing for a lot of attention. You're going to have to make sure that you understand how to make your graphics stand out and how to make your messaging clear, because otherwise you're just going to get lost in the crossfire. And finally, try to understand as best you can what your audience's purchasing motivations are. This ties into when you're going to talk about your messaging. We'll get to that. But think about this. If the biggest obstacle to them buying from you is cost, that's very different than the biggest obstacle being that this is the wrong time of year for that purchase, or that this is just not solving their problem. So you really want to understand what is motivating them to buy this right now, what might get them there, and what are the obstacles that could get in their way. If you actually know people who are in your target audience for a campaign, even if they're just friends or peers or whatever, and you can ask them these questions or have a conversation, even for just 15 minutes, it'll be incredibly helpful to you. Because this is one of those things you kind of guess in your own brain, but sometimes you got to hear from the source. All right, you got the audience figured out, right? Perfect. Let's go on to talking about your channels. One of the firms I worked with back in the day talked a lot about needing to have surround sound. You had to have the information and the messaging coming from a wide range of sources, because the reality is there's so much stuff coming at you that you're not going to remember something you hear one time in one place. And come on, we're all like that, right? So let's talk about how to think about your channels. And channels can be social media platforms. It could be email. It could be actual ads. It could be flyers, whatever it might be, your website. First of all, your best results come through channels you've already established. And this makes sense, right? If you decide the best thing that you can do is promote your campaign on Instagram, but you just are starting your Instagram that day, you're not going to get a lot of traction. As we talked about, the priority is being where your audiences go for purchasing information, not where you are. Look, this is really hard for most entrepreneurs, is to take a step back and recognize that where your audience goes may not be where you think you want to play. So you may love Insta and think it's terrific and a great solution for your business, But if the people you're trying to sell to like to go to Facebook for that information when they're trying to buy something, you obviously aren't going to connect. So the focus needs to be on not where you want to be, but where they need you to be, specifically where they need you to be when they're thinking about buying. So remember also, a lot of channels are free, which is called earned, and others require investment to be effective, which is paid. So one thing, for example, about LinkedIn. LinkedIn, it does a lot of, you can get a long way posting things on your individual feed, your personal profile. But when it comes to posting things on your company page, LinkedIn would really like you to pay for that. So they don't amplify that as well on a free basis, right? Facebook is also the same. They may give you a lot of attention as a person, but when it comes to your company, they'd really like you to write a check for that. So just remember that when you're planning these things, exposure can often depend on how much you're willing to pay to invest. And you may have to use a different approach if you don't have those funds. We talked about the purchasing motivations already. Remember that it's better to have a few strong channels than many ineffective ones. You know, as the social media platforms have continued to expand, right? It used to be just a couple, now it's a zillion. You may be tempted to go for somewhere because it's the latest, greatest thing. And that may not be you. That might not be the right place. It takes a lot of time and energy to do good content, especially for social media, because it's basically a sucking pit of need when it comes to content. It just churns through it fast. So be sure that you're recognizing which channels you want to be in and do them well, as opposed to saying, I've got to be everywhere so that everybody can possibly hear me. And how do you select? Well, the key is what we say next. You want to mix and match channels for maximum exposure to those prospects. So don't be in the places that your prospects aren't playing. That's just not necessary. If you aren't sure where to go, and that's understandable because these social media channels and platforms are changing by the day. So take a look at the data, and I put a link in here for you for a place to go look at social media stats. It walks through each of the platforms and tells you who is likely to be using that. So if you aren't trying to appeal to people of a certain age range, don't go playing in that social media platform. If you don't have a lot of video, don't make a YouTube channel. All those things are kind of self-evident, but the data is there, and that's why you have the link. Finally, I know a lot of people get pitches for using influencers. Influencers can be really effective if they really, really get to work with exactly the target audience you're going for. Now, I'm not sure they're really the best approach to use for a campaign because usually your call to action should be the star, not an influencer. But if you do choose to work through somebody else like an influencer, just be sure that what you're expecting is documented. Because if that influencer says they're going to post during your timeline and they miss it, that was of no help. So you've got to be sure everything is documented as soon as you start bringing in other people. All right. So you've got your audiences and you've got your channels. Let's keep going. You've got to define your timing. And by the way, more time isn't always better. You know, it's a fascinating thing when you do the research to look at how people respond to surveys. It's very clear there are spikes. They do the survey within 24 hours of getting the link, or they do it within 24 hours of getting the reminder. So all of your dates about when the surveys close or when they open, that's not nearly as relevant. So remember, more time doesn't mean more people are necessarily paying attention. It just might be missing an opportunity because a sense of urgency can really be a driving factor. So the first thing, set those clear boundaries. If you've got a special promotion and it's available for weeks, set it, communicate it, and stick to it. If people start knowing that you're always going to have another sale coming along pretty quick, then that urgency disappears and that motivation to purchase now goes away. I think we can all think of some vendors where we know, well, if I miss it this week, it'll be on sale in 2 weeks anyway, or at the next major holiday. I don't have to worry about it. Take decision-making time into account. Remember, if somebody doesn't know much about you, they might hear about you and then want to research and then come back and purchase. So you may need longer than just one time. You want to give them time to get that surround sound to reach them multiple times as they're thinking about their purchase. Remember that one message just isn't enough. They're not going to remember after one time. You know, there used to be a terrific, I've got to take this page. There used to be a terrific number that was the 7 number, which said that people would hear things 7 times before they would even remember that the message existed. They didn't remember what the message said. They just remembered that the message was there. Now they're saying that number could be more like 42. So think about the fact that you've got to hit them not just once, but over and over and over again for it to be effective. Otherwise, you're just not going to be there. Again, I want to emphasize, you want a few strong channels. You want to know what purchasing motivations tie in to those strong channels. Make sure you're putting your time and your energy in the places that can be most effective. Now, you've already talked about mixing and matching channels for the maximum exposure and the data you're going to use. But remember, your timing is not the priority of your audience. All of this conversation brings us back to the importance of your audience. So you may want to wrap something up for your year end or your quarter end, or you might be trying to drive sales to get inventory off of your shelves. That's great. But if the people who are buying from you need a little bit more time to think about it, you've got to give them that time. You know, one of the things that can really help you about your product and offering is to make sure you understand if it is a short cycle sale decision or a long cycle sale. If it's a short cycle sale, that means people don't need as much information. So for example, if I'm trying to decide if I should buy this snack or that snack, I may not be doing a ridiculous amount of research. I may check out a couple of options, but I'm probably going to make a pretty quick decision. And if I'm walking through a store, by the way, I'm making a crazy fast decision because it's right by the register. But if I'm buying a car, or if I'm investing in a training program, or if I'm bringing somebody in to replace equipment, you know, in my building that is more expensive, like HVAC units, or if I'm thinking about what babysitting service and childcare service to use for my child, those are long cycle sales. So you might want to have a longer campaign because they're going to need to hear from you over and over again over a longer period because they just need more time to think about it. And that's okay, but you need to align to those needs. Don't expect that people are going to be saying, oh, you've got a special 1 week deal on signing up with your childcare, and I'm going to make a decision that fast about where my kids go. That may not be realistic. So timing of your audience and the short or long cycle sale pattern, that's what's going to drive your timing decisions, not necessarily that you just need to get it done. And finally, here's the big one, content. Now, the hardest thing about all of this is the one we talked about with the surround sound, right? Your goal is to have that surround sound happening. So people are hearing from you in multiple ways, in multiple places, and just as like an echo chamber, right? They hear it over and over again. For you, the hassle is this. You're going to be really bored of your messaging long before your audiences remember it. You might think you're getting repetitive and people are sick of hearing about it. But remember that 42 times number I threw out there? They won't remember it for most of it. You're going to say it over and over and over again in your content. So as much as innovative, unique content is fun, just remember, if it's too unique and too different every time, you're not getting that traction you need, even in a campaign. So about your content for your campaign, number one, absolutely be sure the call to action is the primary takeaway that your audience will have. If you're trying to sell them something or get them to buy from you for a special sale period, don't bury that in the 5th line of text. They're just not going to get there. If it's something really critical, make sure it's the first thing they see. Don't overwhelm the content with different messages. And we talked about this with the objectives, right? If your goal is to sell something during your promotion, don't add also join our newsletter, also follow us on Facebook, also. That's not going to help you. You want your content during your campaign to just hit it hard. Always try to emphasize benefits over features. Now, we're not going to go into great detail about this, but what this really means is that you want the benefits, which is what happens for your customers, to be the thing they know. Let's face facts. We're all tough customers. And the first question in our minds when we see something to buy is, what's in it for me? How is my life going to be better because I gave you my money? You want to be answering that question right up at the front. Prioritize those kind of messages. Prioritize if something's going to make somebody healthier, happier, wealthier, content, whatever it might be. Make sure that is really clear. Features, things like it has 12 grains or it was made in the United States, that may not be quite as critical. So be sure that you're putting the benefits over your features because you can't say everything and expect people to remember it, right? Adapt the content to fit the channels you're using. So one mistake I see happen is that people get focused on creating something for Insta and something for Facebook and something for LinkedIn and something for YouTube. But the reality is each of those channels has very different needs and has very different ways of promoting content. On YouTube, if you post a video with a ton of text, the video is going to get attention, the text won't. If you're going to be doing something on Facebook, but you make all the sizes of your video, the images aren't right, and so every image comes out really, really tiny in a box, that didn't help you, right? So you've got to adapt your content to fit the channels you're using. By the way, the thing about these channels, these social media feeds in particular, they love it when you give them stuff they can promote because that's what keeps their engines going. But you've got to make sure it fits the format they use and prioritizes the way they do when it comes to content. We already talked about that question around using words that resonate with your audiences. So this is where it's going to come and be applied. You already thought about this in the first step, right? Understanding your audiences. Now you're going to actually say, okay, as I create my content, let's use those words. Let's use those words that really hit them in the heart, that they'll look at and go, yeah, that's what I need. Use videos and graphics only that reinforce your message. Look, it happens all the time. We all like pictures, but you'll end up seeing people who just drop in photos, just have photos. Some social media platforms like photos, some don't care. But the key of it is you've got to make sure that whatever photo or graphic you're using is relevant to what you're saying. There has to be a connection point. Otherwise, it's just a missed opportunity. As you use different channels, and by the way, I encourage you to think beyond just social media. Social media is not everything, particularly if you look at audiences that are a little bit older. Or with longer cycle purchases, right? So if you're buying something that's a little bit more complex, you need a little bit more detail than you're going to get on social. Make sure your messages align across channels, right? There's nothing more frustrating than somebody coming to a social media feed, seeing a product they like, clicking on the link to go to your website, and then your website says totally different things about that product than what you said on social media. And now they're wondering what story is the real one. So be sure they align. They don't have to be word for word exactly the same, but they need to at least align. They need to make sure people get there and go, oh yeah, this is the product I was looking at online that seemed cool. Not that they get there and they go, what? Wait a minute, I thought I was looking for this other thing. And finally, this is that surround sound piece thing, right? Repeat the core message often across your channels and throughout your campaign. You will get bored. That's okay. Keep going because your boredom is going to translate into your prospect audience's attention. All right, next at-home exercise. What I'd like you to do is I'm going to say, look at your campaign, the one we talked about in exercise 1, and list out the key features. Now, I put a table here as an example that has primary and secondary, mostly because I know we all want to do everything. Now, we've already talked about the fact that really you want to focus in on the primary and let the secondary go. But you know, sometimes it's just hard to get there. So I recommend put everything you're thinking in your brain in one of these 2 columns, and then you can weed down. It's a whole lot easier that way for most of us. All right, so that's your next at-home exercise. Pause the presentation if you want to do it right now, or you can come back to it. Executing the activities. So we've spent a lot of time talking about prepping, and you're probably thinking, when are we going to actually get to doing stuff? Well, this is it. This is where the rubber hits the road. So first, when you're thinking about executing it, make a campaign calendar. Make sure it's something that's flexible. Digital usually works better. And make it easy to edit, right? So if only one person in your company uses a Microsoft or Adobe rather, Adobe Illustrator, and everybody else uses Microsoft, well, that's not going to be easily editable. But in there, establish some campaign timelines, such as start dates, content deadlines, funnel campaign timelines. Everything needs to be in there. I usually start with all the timelines and the dates because that's the stuff that doesn't move, right? That's the stuff that isn't as flexible. So I usually start by putting all the campaign timelines and the dates in there, and then I fill in the rest with what the content will be. Also, it lets me see what the breadth of the activity is so that I can start kind of planning a little bit more carefully from a big picture level. Decide how often you're going to be published and set some of those time limits, right? So if you are only going to publish for 2 weeks, make sure you're baking that into your calendar. But do update it as circumstances change. Look, things happen in the national marketplace. Things may happen in terms of events that impact you and your friends and family and the city where you live. Those things happen. So just be sure you're updating and reviewing your plan as things change. One great example about this is I had a client who ran a campaign and about a week into it recognized that they were getting a lot of questions through their company email about one specific aspect of their product. Well, wait a minute. That's a great learning, right? So in the second week of their campaign, they focused on that question and embedded the answer to that question in the campaign content. So now they were removing an obstacle automatically instead of it turning into a whole back and forth email thing. Because the more the customer has to engage to answer questions, the more likely it is that their interest is going to fall off. Monitor your metrics. So, a lot of times I hear, great, we're going to look at the social media, we're going to look at the sales at the end. Well, don't do that. Make sure that you're looking midstream and see if you need to pivot. Are you getting the sales you wanted? Are people clicking on the link you needed them to click? If not, get the team together or get yourself with an advisor or by yourself in a room and spend a little time brainstorming how to solve it. And again, use a format or technology that works for you. Look, I'm going to show you some templates. There are a zillion templates out there. A lot of tools have templates, like Hootsuite's got some things, and then you can always use Microsoft things, and Google's got calendars. Use the tool that works for you. The key is you have to use it. So if you're just going to put it out there and then ignore it when things get hectic, that's not a solution. So use something that works for you. Hey, if putting it on a whiteboard behind your desk or on a piece of paper that you scribbled on by your desk is the best thing for you, great. Do what works for you to be sure that you will use it. All right, here's some tools. And I put in a bunch of tools here because one of the things I know we all struggle with as entrepreneurs is, look, this is a lot of cool stuff, but I don't have the time for all this. Well, we want to help you. So here's some tools. Social media management tools help you post ahead of time. You can schedule things. You can think about them a bit. They often have really good metrics. So I put a link in here of where some free tools or light versions that are free are often available. So you can take a look. Get help. I mean, you need to own your content decisions, but somebody else might be able to do the posting. This might be something you can resource through Upwork, Parker Dewey. You may know somebody who's trying to get their social media business or marketing agency business up and running, and they might be open to a little bit of bartering. Give it a shot, because you might not be able to do this all on your own, and you might need some help. Leverage online resources. Obviously, Canva and Adobe and other tools often have free or inexpensive resources, but I've also put in here a whole lot of links for you. So there's links to free photography sites. This is important because you do not want to use somebody else's licensed imagery. That is not appropriate or legal. Some free photo editing tools, because not everybody wants to pay for Adobe Photoshop. And social media image sizes. Now, this is a great one to bookmark because it changes a lot over time. But for every campaign, you're going to want to double check because they sometimes shift these. And again, you're not going to get a lot of exposure doing something on a social media space if it's sized in the wrong way, right? You don't want to have a little tiny image in a big white box. So that one, I would just bookmark it, honestly. It's over at Sprout Social, and they do a great job of keeping it updated. And then define your automated responses. So what if somebody writes in and says, I love it, how do I order? Do you already have a response to this? Or, hey, I'd like more information. Do you already have a response that says, here's our website? Just think if there's some ways that if you get questions or you get queries, or even more important, if you get comments in your social media in response to your posts, if you know that they're going to say the same thing over and over again or ask the same question, get that response written and just cut and paste it whenever you can. All right, so a basic calendar framework has the channels that you're going to use for the content, the type, the date and time, the person who's in charge of it, very important, and the follow through. Now, here's some examples. Like I said, these may not be right for you. You've got to decide what makes sense for you. I personally am somebody who likes to see a physical calendar, so the one on the lower left works for me. You can find a whole lot of calendar templates online, and you can also find them, as I mentioned, often within some of the tools you'll use, particularly social media tools. They will tend to have calendars built in, but Trello has calendars. There are other versions, Monday does. You can look around and see what's available. So finally, here's some execution tips. As you're going through the campaign and actually making it happen, keep copies of everything you do in a final form. It's okay if it's just a screenshot, but somewhere you're going to want an archive, because someday somebody's going to say, remember that thing, and you may not be able to remember it the way you think. Check all your marketing metrics throughout the campaign so you can adapt. We already talked about that. If you're seeing a certain question come up over and over again, adapt your materials. Here's a big one. And by the way, this is the one I struggle with personally the most, and that's why I wanted to be sure I shared it. Aim for good content that gets out, not perfect content that never gets read. Look, a lot of us are fighting our perfectionist tendencies, and we'd all like to have perfect content every time. But perfect content that doesn't get published is zero value. So give yourself a break and recognize that don't let the perfect get in the way of the really, really good. Incorporate time to respond to those questions and comments. Look, engagement is the key of social media, not publishing. So if you can get into dialogues and conversations in your social media posts during a campaign, that's gold. That's just golden. That's the stuff you're striking for. So make sure you allow some time for that. Keep your eyes on the status around the CTA results. If you measure revenue in a different place, make sure you're looking at those metrics and you're taking a look at it. And finally, don't get distracted by shiny object syndrome. Look, we all have a lot going on and there's constant innovation going on. And so you're always going to see somebody else's idea or a new tool that just came out, or wait, maybe we should put this on TikTok. Whatever it is that's shiny and new, campaigns are probably not the place to go jumping from thing to thing because all of a sudden something new came on the horizon. And I get it. I call that shiny object syndrome, right? Something looks like it'd be so much fun. You just want to be part of it and test it for your business. Great. Not sure a campaign is the right place to do it. So just keep your eyes open for that. Because again, your goal in a campaign is one simple thing. Drive the call to action results. That's it. Not test new things, not try out new things. Drive to the call to action. All right. Finally, let's talk about reviewing our metrics, our fourth step. So here's our myth number 3. Metrics are so complex and they're so time consuming. You know, you don't have to be a statistician to be able to get some metrics that make sense. You don't have to have gory levels of detail, and you don't have to spend 100 hours on it. The key is you want to take a look and say, hey, are we meeting our objective? Which again, we already said was measurable. And what are we learning from this experience? All right, so as you track the campaign results, here's some steps you can follow. For first of all, before you create the campaign actually begins, do a simple dashboard. And I'm not talking about something automated and complex. Don't Google how to do a dashboard unnecessarily because that can be really complex stuff. There are companies that spend all their time making dashboards. For you, it's basically a simple report card. What are the 2 or 3 things we're going to keep an eye on to know that this campaign works? Again, this can be a scribble on a Post-it. It doesn't matter. Then measure results, not actions. So this is really hard, right? Because our inclination is to say, I want to measure what I did because it's within my control. But the thing of it is that the measurement really is, what did you get out of it? So you've got to actually measure the results, like maybe it is the call to action, whether it's the sales or the clicks, whatever it is that you're trying to make happen, that's what you have to measure, not the stuff you did. That is tempting, but don't do that. Prioritize all the results that are related to your call to action. That's what really matters. And anything you can get out of your marketing tools. If you can get something out of Google Analytics, if you can get something out of Facebook, if you can get something out of LinkedIn or out of whatever email system you use the stuff that's already there. That really, really will help. Again, always with that guiding light of your call to action. Now, the fourth one is the one where people usually fall off the cliff, right? You've got it all figured out, but then you get busy and you just never look. Well, schedule reviews. They don't have to be 5-hour-long reviews, but you know, whether it's you by yourself or you with a team or you with an external vendor, sit down for 15 minutes every few days or once a week during a longer campaign and take a look. How's it going? It doesn't have to be a case of analyzing each number to death. Just figure out, are we doing fine? Do we need to improve it a little bit? Or, oh my gosh, it's gone off the rails. We've got to really stop it and figure something out. Red, green, yellow. I like a really simple stoplight chart myself. Finally, you finish your campaign. You just want to be done with it, right? You're sick of it. I did it, done. Check the box. Moving on to the next thing. And I get it, right? Entrepreneurs are crazy busy. But even if it's only 15 minutes, take some time at the end to say, here's where we landed. Here's how that report card turned out. And be honest about it. Faking these numbers isn't hurting anybody but you. Take a look at that report card. Did we do great? Did we do okay? Or did we really just miss it? And that's okay. Your goal is to get the information that you learned from. And then make sure you're sitting down to write a few suggestions for next time. Again, this isn't an opportunity to beat yourself up. This is to say, hey, wait a minute. We noticed the second week was more effective. So this is what we're going to do next time from the start. Hey, we recognize that the third post, people pretty much had already checked out by then. So the first two are more impactful. Whatever it is, pick out some of those things, but don't just state what went wrong, because that's A, disheartening, and B, less than helpful. Take the time to actually say, you know what, now that we figured out where we can improve and where we did things well, don't miss the well stuff, give yourself some celebration. Then the next column right next to it needs to be, so what does this mean to our next campaign? Because you want to take all this knowledge you have, and then you want to apply it next time, because that's where you see the building knowledge and the building skills that makes every campaign that you do as you go forward better and better and better, and your results will get better and better and better as well. All right, some final campaign tips. Don't make the whole process cumbersome, right? Using a pen and paper is fine for a starting point. The key is you're doing the thinking, right? The critical thinking and then planning that needs to go on. You're giving it conscious business thought. So don't make it crazy busy. Don't spend 5 hours teaching yourself how to use Excel to do this. Just make it work. We already talked about you're going to get bored way before they remember it. So just be prepared for that. Don't skip the lessons learned after a campaign. By the way, if you think you'll remember, I can guarantee you won't remember accurately, because what you remember right after something happens is often different than what you remember later on looking back. So capture those lessons learned as soon as you can after a campaign. You may distill them and see them differently over time, but capture them real time. Leverage anything you can online. There really are a lot of free tools and assets and guidance that you can use. Go find it. You do not have to recreate the wheel in this. You will not get brownie points for that, because what you're really looking to do is get that call to action result going forward. Prioritize it first and last and throughout. Don't let yourself get distracted. And finally, be sure messaging is consistent across all your channels. First of all, it makes your workload a lot lighter if you're not trying to start from scratch with your messaging in everything you do across a campaign. But also, it's going to help retention. And after all, your goal is for people to see the message, retain the message, and act on your message. Take that call to action that you're looking for. That makes it work a lot better. All right, it has been great going through all these steps with you. I know it's a lot, but this is kind of like when you go to the gym. These are muscles you will build over time. The first time you may need to pull up this deck and kind of walk through, make some checklists for yourself. The second time you'll need it a little bit less. Third and fourth, you'll be off to the races. And suddenly you'll realize that when you're thinking about a campaign, a lot of these questions are just built into the way you think about it even before you get started. So these are muscles you will develop. Even if it seems like a lot right now, trust me, if you use these steps in a year, within a year, you're not going to need a checklist. You're going to push out those plans so easily that calendar will be super speedy, because practice, practice, practice. It really does make a difference when it comes to campaigns and planning and getting really, really good at making sure your call to action is the thing that your audiences see, remember, and act on. All right, good luck. I hope your campaigns go great.